Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Selhorn, and welcome to another episode of Speak Easy, the podcast where we discuss communication, productivity systems, capturing our thoughts, and how we share those thoughts with our future selves and others. We believe that managing our brains is core to 21st century work, and we're here to learn how to do it better than we did yesterday. Thanks so much for listening. Speak Easy is brought to you by Cleft. With our cross-platform applications, you can simply speak your mind, and Cleft will collect your thoughts. Cleft enables you to process verbally wherever you are and send your best bits on later. Today, we are blessed to be learning out loud with Solange Abraham. Solange is an impact-driven sales success partner and founder at House by Solange. She isn't your typical sales expert. She managed an ad spend portfolio measuring 40 million euro at Google and crushed it at Salesforce. But those enterprise credentials are just the tip of the iceberg for Solange. Starting in a Dutch town so small it doesn't have traffic lights, she cold called her way into enterprise tech, closing major deals with no experience, and built her business in a new country with zero network. Today, she partners with service-based businesses by bringing them the same strategic depth and sales expertise that big companies get. She leverages real stories, practical solutions, and a fresh take on making sales feel good again. Solange, thank you so much for allowing us to capture your thoughts today. I'm wondering, how do we have sales conversations and communicate inside of those opportunities in a way that really optimizes for connecting with other people and getting them to give us their money?
So excited to be here. And I love that question because that's exactly what I do. And it's the number one thing in sales, right? Like it feels very counterintuitive. I think, as we're raised, as children and we go into our first jobs, we're very much going into these permission based environments. And so going out and going up to someone uninvited feels super uncomfortable because we kind of correlate that with unwelcome. But one of the things that I always talk about with my clients, and one of the things that, has helped me throughout my career in corporate tech and selling there, is that unexpected doesn't mean unwelcome, right? And I think what's really important is setting your intent before you go into any sort of sales conversation. You're going into a conversation because you truly believe that working with you is to the better result of the person you're hoping to work with. So you're coming in to the conversation with the intent of making their lives better, right? And so when we go in there with understanding and compassion and patience, right? We're not going in there to pitch straight away and to kind of chase people away with a whole bunch of acronyms and business jargon and all this stuff. We're going in to understand how we can make their lives better. That takes away a bit of that ickiness in the sale conversation.
Okay. I love centering the other person,
Yes.
right? And saying, how can I make their lives better? How can I make their life better? Maybe it's lives. Maybe you're selling a big account, right? It's lots of people, right? Let's go back to the thing you started with. You said counterintuitive. What is
Mhm.
it about that kind of communication that makes it counter? Right? You talked about like we were trained like maybe in permission-based environments, you said. Pull that apart a little bit for us. Like why does that kind of sales conversation feel counterintuitive?
Right. I will take you back to my very first sales job for that because I think that's the perfect example. It was a very work environment. It felt like a B version of the Wolf of Wall Street, but it
Well,
was
wait,
sales
wait,
school.
wait.
It's sales school in the fact that they made me do 100 calls a day,
Mm,
right? And still to this day, when I make a cold call, I feel my heart beating because it's like, what is this other person going to think of me interrupting their day? Right. And I think that's our default because we're not used to putting ourselves in a situation that's intentionally uncomfortable, right? We're not used to, talking to people. A lot of us have forgotten how to make conversation. I think also in the age of social media, like even when you go out, like how often do you actually walk up to someone and introduce yourself and have a conversation? Like that just doesn't quite happen as much anymore. And so I think picking up the phone and calling someone cold, not knowing how they're going to respond, maybe feeling a little bit unsure of how you're going to position what you do. There's a lot happening in your own mind, like, oh, I don't want to mess up like my intro and how am I going to get past the gatekeeper and all this stuff. And it's anxiety, anxiety, anxiety. And so that feeds into this idea of, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to mess up my words. It's so unwelcome. And I think that's what I mean when I say we're used to working in a permission-based environment where a lot of us haven't actually experienced picking up the phone, calling someone cold, and having a fantastic, 30-minute conversation that was completely unexpected, but absolutely welcome, right?
Mm. Okay. It helps me to hear you say, and maybe it helps the listener too,
Yes.
that you as a pro, right, still have those butterflies ahead of calls. And even this podcast, right, is partly about turning cold conversations into lukewarm conversations, right, with people. We'd like to get our name out there. And, but I think that's a mini version of that, right? Just have the conversation, right? When we were talking about centering the other person, right? I think that's useful in any kind of conversation, right?
Oh
Like,
my
let
god.
alone a sales one. Okay. Well, how about we stay curious, right? Stay interested in the other person, right? Like, it's not a directed conversation, right? It's really about them. Okay, well, how can I serve them? Like, that's what I'm doing as a salesperson, or just like having this conversation. I want to do this in service of them.
Yeah, I
Um,
wanna hire you
yeah,
right
please,
now. Like,
sure.
this is the exact language that I use. I love what you said about curiosity. For me, it's about creating genuine understanding of someone, right? Like when we come in, ideally, when you build your business, you're building it around a problem or a challenge that you're seeing in the market. But that doesn't mean that we go in with judgment and assumptions. I know it's going to make your life better because I've been doing this for a while and you don't know what your own challenge is, right? That feels very different from coming in and saying, hey, we noticed, if we look at Cleft, we noticed that, there just isn't a great way to capture those rambling thoughts and structure them that fits into your natural day to day, right? It's always living somewhere else. You always have to go somewhere to get that done. You're not going to people saying you don't know how to organize your thoughts. You're going to people saying, help me understand how I can help you. Here are my thoughts about that. How does that fit into your life? And I think in terms of curiosity, my main MO is I always talk about creating understanding. 90% of your sales conversation is asking questions. I posted on Threads, which I'm very active on Threads. I posted every single question I asked in a discovery call, and there were 22 questions, a 30-minute discovery call, which means I ask my question and then I shut up because I want to learn so that I can understand, so that I can serve, so that I can make money. Right.
Mhm.
But it all is centered in that genuine curiosity and really wanting to understand the prospect in front of you.
You got to walk us through how to get into that mindset of saying, I'm going to ask the questions. And so, just a little bit of background about me. A previous
Mhm.
career, I was a secondary mathematics teacher, and I was very Socratic in the way that I taught class, and I was a wait time teacher. I was going to ask the question, right? And like it was gonna I told my students, "I'm gonna wait an awkward amount of time for you to be able to think on your own, because I want to know what you know, not what I can say out loud. Because like this understanding, I'm gonna check for understanding even after you've said a thing. I'm gonna say, so what you're saying is like those sorts of things. How do we get into that mindset of being an educator, being a helper, being someone who is curious? How do we get into the mindset of that as a salesperson or as someone who is interested in helping other people in a way that they may not already have thought of, right? How do we get into that space?
Yeah, so I always talk about ask, learn, confirm, which is exactly what you just laid out as your position as a teacher. There's a couple of things. Silence is something you have to be comfortable with if you're going to be in a sales call, because the whole point is that we ask a question that has so much impact that we stun the other person into silence because we want them to be thinking. We want them to feel like this is something they might have not been asked before, that might be a little bit uncomfortable to answer, which is really funny because that actually builds the trust between two people, something that they might feel, oh, no one's actually ever, taken the time to understand me to that level of depth, right? So we want them to be like, oh, okay, let me think about that. And we want to give them the space to actually formulate an answer, right? So we don't want to rush in and come in fill the silence and be like, oh, sorry if that was too personal, whatever. No, let them think and then let them answer. And I think the way you get into the conversation with that mindset again comes down to intent. Are you going in there to serve someone and help someone make their life better? Or are you going in there to, pitch no matter what, to get the money no matter what, and leave feeling like super icky about it? So I think for me, going into a conversation, I'm always there to learn about you. Always. I genuinely am just so passionate about what I do. I want to help you make more money. Please show me how I can do that. Right.
Mm.
And so I think coming in, asking those questions, and this is probably going to be one of your follow up questions is okay, how do you know that you're asking the right questions?
Please.
So one of the things that really grinds my gears is I keep seeing this online is that a question such as what keeps you up at night is supposedly a really good question. And I vehemently disagree. Like it makes me nauseous, that particular question. And it's one of the things that was actually taught to me at Salesforce. I remember I was in my onboarding and it was day 1 or day 2, I think. Of the facilitator said, why do we never ask someone what keeps them up at night? And that stunned all of us into silence because we weren't quite sure what the answer was. And the thing is, we're supposed to know what keeps our prospects up at night, right? And if we turn that into a practical example, Tyler, I send you an email and I say, I've built this product that's going to solve your problems. And you think, okay, cool. I'll take the call. I'll have the chat. We go onto the call. And my first question to you is, so Tyler, what keeps you up at night? Right? That completely discredits my expertise. If I have the solution to the problem, why am I asking you what the problem is? Right? So I think it's important that when we go in to ask confirmation based questions, we're not asking questions that waste our prospects' time, such as what keeps you up at night, because we're supposed to know.
Okay, so you just introduced this idea of confirmation-based questions, right?
Yes.
And so you've got that doesn't sound curious. That sounds like very directed, right? And so help us tease that apart because I'm somebody who was raised by a former salesperson who was open probe versus closed probe questions and it actually is not necessarily always great, in interpersonal relationships to have that be a part of things, but it's it is an umbrella set of terms to kind of help us to understand what is curious or versus what is confirmation based and what is the difference there? What are you talking about when you say confirmation based questions versus those curiosity things we started?
Yeah. So I go back to ask, learn, confirm. We
Mhm.
ask from curiosity, trying to understand the scope of the challenge, right? So that could look like, for example, when I was at Salesforce, hey, I noticed that, your competitor has just completely reorganized and updated their tech stack. Curious to kind of understand what that means for your position in the market. And that was a really good question because it kind of hints at the fact that there's a big shift about to happen in the market, right? Either in their favor, in which case they need to act fast, or it would be against their favor, in which case they need to act fast, right? So we want to come in with a question that establishes our expertise. I know what I'm talking about. I'm not here to waste your time. When we get the answer, when we're learning, we want to start asking those curiosity based questions. Help me understand that. Can you unpack that? Right? We're trying to get more information. And then when we confirm, we ask those confirmation based questions. So, am I getting it correctly that? Are you saying that? Does that mean that? Right? So, ask, establish your expertise with a really good question that shows that you know what you're talking about. Learn, which is our curiosity. Tell me more. Unpack that. Let's go back to. And confirm, which is where we kind of try and get our prospect to reiterate what they're saying so that we understand that we're on the right track here. And to me, the difference between a good sales conversation and a great sales conversation is being able to repeat that process a few times before you jump in with your actual solution.
Okay, that was really helpful to spend some time, like more than once, repeating that ask, learn, confirm space there. So thank you for this moment to reflect on that process of, maintaining curiosity, but then also having some directed types of communication as well. Because I'm curious to learn about your process away from the prospect, right? Away from the person. Like you were talking about being prepared, right? And
Mhm.
and having an idea about what keeps people up at night ahead of the conversation. Like, I guess maybe I'm curious, like how you prepare yourself to like understand and know those kinds of things ahead of a call, or maybe even like after you've done the cycles of ask, learn, confirm a few times with somebody and the call is over, like what do you do with that information? What do you do with that conversation? How do you transform that into something that is like a proposal or I don't
Yeah.
help me understand like what you do with those conversations.
Yeah. So I guess there's 2 questions there, right? Is one, what do you do ahead of the
Right.
conversation? What do you
Yes.
do with that conversation? Before you have any sort of sales conversation, I always operate from the assumption that my clients have built something they understand. They've built something that fills a gap in their industry that they understand. We didn't just say, oh, today I'm going to start a social media agency and people will get what that means and that will be that. No, you're solving a problem. And so, the same way that we do market research to figure out what the actual problem is, we're also trying to stay on top of the pulse of what that translates to in terms of what our prospects are talking about on a daily basis. So, if I take my business as an example and I look at the corporate side of my business, I know that when we talk about big tech, there's a huge conversation happening right now around most of the sellers being account managers versus hunters for new business, right? Because in big tech, we've just had this insane run of growth and growth and growth, and that bubble has burst. I'm sure not everyone will agree with me as I say that, but we've seen all the layoffs and things like that. So now we're back in this phase where we need hunters in our sales teams. We need people to actually be able to go out and find business, to have those conversations. And the name just doesn't mean what it used to anymore. Like people don't really care that you pick up the phone and call from Meta or Google or Salesforce. What does that mean for me? Right. And I think understanding that piece is really important for me because I know that this is what my decision makers are talking about all day long. This is what they're in meetings about. Now, you can be preemptive with this information by using that in your content. So I talk about this all of the time, but also as you reach out to people, understanding or creating the understanding, sorry, as you email them or call them, whatever, you're explaining their challenge in their language in the same way that they had 500 meetings this week, trying to figure out if someone on their team has the answer to this, to which the answer is usually no, right? I think that is really important. Do you really understand what your prospect is talking about all day? Do you really understand what they're trying to solve? And can you communicate that back to them in their language, which happens ahead of the call when you do your research and when you're talking to people in the field, when you stay up to date with your podcasts, reading articles, whatever that might mean. I know that was quite a big chunk of me just yapping away. So before I go to what we do with that information after the call, do you have any other questions here?
Well, Solange, it was awesome to learn more from you, and I'm going to take away so many awesome things. I guess maybe I want to invite you to conclude for that person that is considering what it is that they might need to be able to get better at these kinds of conversation, this kind of communication. How can we get started?
Well, I mean, number one, you can work with me. Like it's what I do.
There we go.
But I think number 2 is it really isn't as difficult as we think. You're a person talking to another person. Just center that. It's not about your pitch, it's not about what you do. You're literally just trying to connect with someone else, and I think the rest of it is just noise. Go in with the right intent, which is I'm trying to understand how I can serve you better. Go in with your, your ask, your expertise, your learn, your curiosity, your confirm, your confirmation based question, and just practice patience as you go through that so that your prospect doesn't feel rushed. And that's going to really set the tone to change sales conversations as you know them pretty much.
Solange, thank you so much. I'm just curious if people are interested to follow up with you or follow along with what you're doing, what's the best way to do that?
Tyler, thank you so much for having me on today. I had a blast chatting with you, and I wish it didn't have to end. And if anyone listening feels the same way and is wanting this conversation to keep going, I have a few places where we can connect. Number one, and please do this straight away, it's such a no-brainer. Subscribe to my free weekly newsletter. It's called The Close, and every Friday I break down why people really buy, minus all of the typical sales BS. If you want to yap with me on a daily basis, I pretty much live on threads all day long at House by Solange. So follow me there and yap along with me. And I do have a special treat for anyone listening today. If you've been listening to this conversation and a specific sales challenge has come up, or you're wondering how to apply some of what I've said to your business and your services, my clarity calls are probably exactly what you need. So, as a special for all listeners today, I'm offering 20% off your first clarity call with me if you use the code CLEFT. That is CLEFT in all caps for 20% off your first clarity call.
Solange, thanks so much for your generosity with Cleft users. Looking forward to people finding value with you. Well, Solange, thank you so much for learning out loud with us today and giving us a chance to capture your thoughts.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tyler.
Blessings. Speak Easy is brought to you by Cleft. With our cross-platform applications, you can simply speak your mind and Cleft will collect your thoughts. Cleft enables you to process verbally wherever you are and send your best bits later. Check us out at cleftnotes.com. That's CLEFTNOTES.com.